Through the Gates is produced under the support of the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management to enhance, promote, and defend the North American model of wildlife conservation and responsible wildlife management. That's our mission. We're engaged in fighting at every level so that wildlife management remains science-based and conservation continues to work for our wildlife. To learn more and join the movement, visit SaveTheHuntColorado.com. The North American model of wildlife conservation is the greatest conservation model in the world. It's a success story that should be shared and celebrated because everybody is a part of it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Through the Gates podcast. We got kind of a unique episode this week as we kind of jump back into the 7 tenets of the North American model. As we open each episode of our podcast with the mission of the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management, which is to enhance, promote, and defend the North American model of wildlife conservation and science-based wildlife management, the core of which is the 7 tenets. And we encourage everybody to learn these, use them, use that knowledge as the basis for your conversations that you have among the hunting community as well as the non-hunting community, whoever in your life that might be interested in learning about what we do as hunters, as conservationists, use it as a way to converse with them, educate them about everything that goes into the management of all wildlife in North America. A few years back, we made a series of videos that we're going to kind of play as this episode goes on. So we encourage you to watch this on our YouTube channel. But we're also going to have a link where you can download the videos of the 7 tenets. We made those as educational tools. And so we want people to be able to access them, download them, share them, to get that message, get that story out there in a very short and digestible manner. And so we'll jump in and introduce the 7 tenets. We'll add some commentary that Dan kind of explains some of these a little bit further. Part of the reason we're doing this is we're probably going to have some episodes in the future where we're going to highlight certain tenets that the antis are really starting to attack as they try to bastardize the North American model and twist it for their arguments. Not the least of which is the tenet of legitimate use. And we're going to see, especially here in Colorado, the working groups that are going on, the ballot box biology that you've probably heard us talk about that is potentially forthcoming, upcoming legislative sessions, as well as the Parks and Wildlife Commission, as all of these are going to come to the forefront as they attempt to remove things like the utilization of furs. And therefore, the act of legal and highly regulated trapping. That's a big one that they're going after right now. So like I said, all of these videos that we're going to play are available for download in the links below. Download them, post them, get conversations started about responsible use of the resource and how wildlife management has perpetuated for 125 years. And then at the end of this episode, we're going to cut to a pretty inspirational speech from Shane Mahoney, who, along with Dr. Valerius Geist, wrote the book on the North American model, which is, of course, worth checking out for a much, much deeper dive into what the model is, why it is, and how it works for wildlife and their habitat. Shane made this speech in 2022 when he joined us and had the pleasure of meeting Shane at this event, Sportsman's Day at the Capitol. But without further ado, we'll jump in and hope you guys get a lot out of this and can utilize some of the information to further the discussion on responsible wildlife management.
Wildlife in North America is a public resource. No matter if it exists on land or water, public or private property, wildlife cannot be owned by any single person or group. We entrust government agencies to manage wildlife and ensure sustainable populations for the future.
Wildlife is considered a public resource, independent of the land or water where wildlife may live. government at various levels have a role in managing that resource on behalf of all citizens and to ensure the long-term sustainability of wildlife populations. You could tell that's probably a whole episode for us or anybody else. And while people have gotten into the description of the model or the definition of the model, being able to try to decipher that, how that might play into a legislative decision or a commission decision, those are the hardest things to be able to try to get people that aren't educated and don't understand the basis of the model and the pillars and the way that science-based wildlife management has actually evolved over the course of the last 100-plus years. The Boone and Crockett Club, the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, and a plethora of other organizations have propped up this model for the reason of continuity and sustainability, to make sure that not so much that we're lockstep with everything, but that we actually have a basis on what our principles are established and why we want to continue to do what we do. It's no secret that markets for wildlife products led to the destruction of much of North America's wildlife historically. Eliminating wild game meat markets makes it illegal to sell the meat from any wild animal. This removes a damaging threat to wildlife populations and ensures sustainable harvest in line with legitimate purpose. This is a controversial subject because government actions making it illegal to buy and sell meat and parts of game and non-game species have removed a huge threat to the survival of those species, and a market in fur bearers continues as a highly regulated activity. Because I'm a trapper, because I'm a fur harvester, currently I'm still the president for the Colorado Trappers and Predator Hunters Association, we've had to argue this point because the antis continually come back and say, you are in direct contrast, contrary to the North American model, because you harvest fur. You commercialize fur. There's an exemption in this, and the reason being is because they're fur-bearing animals. And if you look at the legitimate use side of the model, it actually gets into the explanation of why fur-bearer harvest is actually legal if it's regulated, and it's proven to benefit the species under those fur bearer classifications. And like in Colorado, we've got 17 fur bearer that are classified under that designation. Some states have 10, some states have 20, but for the grand scheme of things, it's all of what we do at all single levels to make sure that we've got all of it combined for that market component of the pillar. If you want to support a company that supported the efforts to defeat Proposition 127, then you need to support Davis Tent. Davis Tent has provided quality canvas goods for outdoorsmen for the last 50-plus years. For more information, go to davistent.com. If you want to support another business that was instrumental in helping us defeat Proposition 127, check out Salida Gun Shop. Salida Gun Shop in Salida, Colorado provides quality products, expertise, and knowledge from individuals that actually do what they sell. Go to salidagunshop.com. Listen to the advice of Cameron Haynes and support companies that are supporting your cause and your efforts. Minturn Anglers is one of those companies. Minturn Anglers provides product and fishing excursions in Colorado and are second to none. For more information, go to minturnanglers.com.
Regulations, policies, and laws ensure this public resource is used appropriately. Government agencies allow access to hunting, fishing, and trapping as management tools to ensure sustained populations. Using legal mechanisms such as seasons, limits, and licenses helps ensure a sustainable wildlife harvest. Laws also regulate land use and recreation in order to reduce negative impacts to wildlife and its habitat.
Taking into consideration that while we all might gripe and moan and groan and complain at different levels about our game agencies because they didn't give us what we want or we didn't understand what they were trying to do, we have to have somebody set there, and the allocation of law goes into the game management agencies, whether it's federal, state, or even out of the country.
The taking of wildlife is highly regulated. Harvesting wild food, mitigating conflict, and meeting population goals based on research are all legitimate reasons for take. Sporting communities, NGOs, and wildlife agencies have collaborated to develop ethical codes such as fair chase and best management practices to ensure wildlife harvest is done legally, sustainably, and humanely.
That goes into the concept of what I mentioned about the fur bearers. Wildlife is a shared resource that must not be wasted, and this law prohibits killing wildlife for frivolous reasons. Meat, management, and fur are not for frivolous reasons. Those are components of the model that I adhere to, and every sportsman that I know adheres to, and you're going to get offshoots of individuals, but for the most part, management of wildlife is a proven history. It's an opportunity for wildlife managers to incorporate the public concerns, whether they're hunters or non-hunters, but hunters as a whole turn around and really sustain and adhere to those principles.
Wildlife does not recognize political boundaries. They are a public resource internationally, and collaboration between states, provinces, and nations is key to protecting species and habitat. This means that a bird species can migrate from Canada through the United States and into Mexico without losing necessary habitat or becoming susceptible to unregulated harvest.
If you know anything about the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and CITES, some species, such as migratory birds, cross national boundaries, and treaties such as the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and CITES recognize the shared responsibility to manage these species across national boundaries. You get into the wildlife that goes from Alaska to Canada to the United States and down into Mexico and South America. They have protections, and they're done for a reason, looking at the holistic and organic approach to be able to manage that wildlife accordingly and not take any one specific species and elevate it or pedestalize it above another.
The conservation of wildlife is at its best when science is the primary tool for informing wildlife management and policy. Highly educated professional biologists spend years designing studies, gathering data, and disseminating their findings on how to recover, protect, and sustain wildlife populations. Without peer-reviewed studies, wildlife management becomes dependent on opinion and emotion, leading to misguided and misinformed policies. Science-based management is crucial for ecological balance.
That means in order to manage wildlife as a shared resource fairly, objectively, and knowledgeably, decisions must be based upon sound science, such as annual waterfowl population surveys and the work of professional wildlife biologists, like what we saw here that was exhibited on Proposition 127 on the Bobcat and Mountain Lion Ballot Initiative that happened in 2024. Scientists manage our wildlife, not extremists, not voters, not politicians, but scientists. Because wildlife is a public resource, access to interact with and enjoy wild species is the right of each citizen, regardless of wealth, social status, or land ownership. Wildlife is for everyone. The responsible use of wild places and wild things creates value and fosters stewardship of these shared natural resources. The opportunity to hunt and fish has created the funding mechanisms necessary for the conservation of all wildlife. Somebody might own the property, but they don't own the animals that are on that property. That's managed by the state. That's managed by the federal government, depending on if it falls under the federal confines of things. These are things that people need to be aware of when we're talking about referencing the North American model. The antis, the extremists, have not come up with anything to replace it. They just want to get rid of it because it doesn't go along with their beliefs. Shane Mahoney with Conservation Visions, and Shane also started the Wild Harvest Initiative. Shane and I become friends over the course of the last several years. We first met back in 2022. But Shane, for those of you who don't know, is probably one of the most well-spoken, knowledgeable, passionate, thoughtfully minded individuals that you could ever come across when it comes to science-based wildlife management and being able to sustain our conservation efforts throughout the world, not just in North America.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for inviting a boy from Newfoundland, which is a long way away, to participate in this very significant event here today. It may be something that not every American citizen realizes, but your country has created the greatest, most complex, and most effective conservation system in the world. I deal with a great many international organizations. I'm appointed to conventions of various kinds and so forth. And I've made it part of my life to try to make people understand exactly what was created in this country and shared in with Canada in developing what was known as the North American model of wildlife conservation. You represent one of the few countries in the world that at the scale of your nation, not at a small scale, but at the scale of your nation, and in combination with a neighboring country, Canada, actually was able to do what most of the world is trying to do today, which is to rescue and maintain the diversity of wildlife on this planet and allow human beings to benefit from interactions with those other animals that we share this planet with. In the last several days, I have taken part, as Dan Gates said, with the Partners in the Outdoors Conference. And part of that process, as I have come to understand it, is an attempt to bring together the many voices from the many different users of the outdoors to try to come to some understanding of how we can, all of us, engage with nature, but at the same time not diminish the very thing that we seek, the very thing that makes us feel good, the very thing that contributes to our health and our local economies and our local jobs and our local opportunities and to our families and to our communities. This business of trying to fit many users into a space is never easy. Just like the founding of this country, it wasn't founded because everybody agreed on what direction the nation should take. It was founded because there were a great many diverse opinions about what the country should be, but there were enough intellectuals and passionate people committed to making it a great country that it became the great country that it is in fact today. I have been coming to the United States of America for 25 years. I have spoken in virtually every state in this country, and in many states, I've spoken many times. And I can assure you that in every single circumstance, I have been welcomed by the people of that state, even though the cultures of your nation are different, and the regions can be very different from one another, and your political parties obviously can feel very differently about many different issues. The basic decency and values of this country are worth preserving. They matter to the world in every sense, from the point of view of safety and world security, from the point of view of economies around the world, from the point of view of innovating technologies. For all of those reasons, the United States of America stands in pretty much a singular position in the world still to this day. But it is the welcoming by the American people of individuals such as me, who came from away and who had different ideas and brought new ideas to this country, and yet those new ideas were welcomed, taken up, and formed to become part of the backbone of what we believe is conservation today. The North American model, it is a great shame, in fact, that the North American model, which was primarily driven by this country 120 years ago, that took wildlife from an absolute state of disaster, took the environment, in fact, from an absolute state of disaster in this country to a circumstance where today you have wildlife abounding almost everywhere. Your particular state is particularly unusual in a sense, in that you have so much, and you have built so many institutions, so many funding mechanisms, so many different levers, so many different mechanisms and institutions in order to make conservation work. You ought to be extremely proud to live in this particular state. You ought to be extremely proud of the fact that you can see and share experiences in the outdoors in whatever dimension you wish, as a rock climber or a hunter or an angler, whatever your pursuit in the outdoors is. It does not come by accident. Wildlife was not rescued by accident. Good policies and laws do not come by accident. Good countries are not made by accident. Good values do not arise by accident. Commitment to ideals does not come by accident. All of that comes from passionate commitment, fortitude, the idea that you pursue what is right, you stand for what is right, you do what is right, you exemplify what is right in the world. Wildlife. Wildlife is about the most precious thing we have. Not only because we are enthralled by animals, And every single person, I don't care if you hunt or you fish or you bird watch or you don't do anything, if you just sit at home on your veranda and drink cold beer, you're still fascinated when you see a wild creature. You always are. It's innate within us. And to live in a world where they do not exist is to live in an empty world. You can have mountains, but if those mountains do not contain sheep, they do not contain goats, they do not contain high-altitude lakes where brook trout flourish, if you do not have alpine meadows where you have elk, if you do not have all of those spectacles that you see, rivers can run, but if there's no fish in those rivers are nothing to you. If plains are not inhabited by antelope and other creatures, they are simply plains. And mountains the same way. It is the wild creatures that live there that inspire us. And every single person that goes afield, it is the interaction with a wild animal that they will come back and talk about after that day. They may ski a slope, they may float a river, they may simply sit in the outdoors and listen to the trees and the wind. But any interaction with a living wild other will be the first thing that they will tell their family, their friends, as soon as they return. That also is not by accident. That is what is built within us. It is extraordinary to me that in this country, despite the fact that you already achieved 100 years ago the most formidable model in conservation, the North American model, which was largely built within the United States of America, although Canadian Prime Minister lived with it, helped support it. Canadian bureaucrats lived with it, helped to support it. Canadian scientists did the same thing. It became a process of two countries. But the real force, the real raison d'etre for it, came out of the United States of America. And what amazes me is that you continue to innovate, you continue to build. There is something inside the American psyche that is different. You are constantly trying to build new pieces, new institutions, new funding mechanisms, new ways of doing good things for wildlife and encouraging people in their outdoor traditions. So when I come here, and I'm honored to be here, and I sit and I watch the machinations within this legislature, as I have done in many places in the world, it is amazing to think that we gather here today around wild food in this April of the year 2022, not centuries ago. Here in this modern era, we come together to consume wild food, and we come together to recognize that a government with bipartisan support has decided to do this kind of thing, to create a day that honors that one group in American society more than any other, but not alone, but more than any other, that has contributed to the conservation of nature of all forms, of all kinds, of habitats and wildlife species themselves, which is, of course, the hunting and angling communities of your country. And it is not only, as so often is emphasized, this issue that hunters pay. It is not only that that is true, but hunters do a lot more than simply pay excise taxes or buy hunting licenses to help fund conservation programs. They build non-governmental organizations that further assist wild sheep foundations and Rocky Mountain elk foundations and backcountry hunters and anglers and all of those other kinds of entities, all of them built by hunters. And they pour money back into conservation programs. And then there is the enormous amount of volunteerism that comes out of the hunting community, doing things for wildlife for nothing, simply so that every generation of Americans can have the opportunities to engage with nature and in whatever way they choose to do. Although the men at work, to quote an Australian song, are still inside doing the things they do, building laws and debating with one another about what is the best way forward for their state and the people who they represent, I do want to say something to them. I formerly ran a wildlife agency in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I formerly ran a sustainable development program and an institute there. I knew every premier, which is comparable to your governor, virtually in the history of that province because we only joined Canada in 1949. I wasn't born then, but I was born a short time after. I've known the political elites of Newfoundland and Labrador. We are close to our politicians there because everybody knows everybody. And I know how difficult it is to serve in public office. We all, of course, take our time to have a joke or two about, politicians and what they stand for and why they want to be in power or why they want to stay in power and so on and so forth. But the truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, it is a very, very difficult proposition to decide to enter public life. And particularly in today's world, where you are open to scrutiny by every single person on this planet. If you do one thing wrong, you make one misstep, you make one misquote, even though it may be entirely innocent, you are suddenly held out to dry because why? Because you dared to become an officer of the public service. You dared to offer yourself to represent the people of your state or your nation. And what is even more problematic today, and every single one of you listening to me today know this is absolutely true. What is even more problematic today is to find ways of reaching across the aisle, to become bipartisan in support of things. Politics has become vicious, very divisive. And so when we see people come together to pass the kind of laws that will be passed today or signed by the governor, and to see things that are done that represent people from different ideological positions supporting what I consider to be the most important thing in the world, which is the conservation of nature and the custodianship of our traditions of using and engaging with the natural world. When I see that happening, that gives me hope. In a few weeks and over the next 2 months, I will be in Latvia, I will be in Kenya, I will be in Botswana in the next 6 or 7 weeks. And I can tell you that you had better believe that you live in a dream world when you can live in freedom, when you can live under circumstances where you have access to the natural world, the wild beauty, and have around you both the legislators and the politicians that reside, as well as the institutions of science and sustainable wildlife management that allows all of this to continue. It does not happen by accident, ladies and gentlemen. It is not maintained by accident, and it is no sideshow. Because if we do not conserve the natural world, we do not conserve our freedoms, we do not conserve our ways of life, and we do not conserve our sense of peace and stability. So I thank all of you for what you are doing in this state, for all you're doing for wildlife, for the leadership you're showing, and for all you are doing for this country. Because believe me, your country may not be perfect, but I guarantee you, you have given a disproportionate amount of good to the world. Thank you very much.
Do some research on your own to find out what is this model? What are the pillars of the model? How does this go along with what I would like to see my elected officials and my commission leaders maybe be able to turn around and support? Utilize this as an information tool to where when you talk to your friends or your neighbors or your congregation or your business partners or your family, you can start to prop up the model, because without that model to be propped up, we have nothing when it comes to the public resource explanation of why we hunt and why we need to manage game animals. For more information, go to SaveTheHuntColorado.com, and we look forward to giving you more information down the road. But look up the North American model of wildlife conservation. Look up Shane Mahoney. Look up the late Valerius Geist and see what they did for conservation efforts, not just in Colorado, not just in the West, not just in the United States, but worldwide. Follow us and subscribe on any of the platforms that you're looking at. Give us a 5-star rating, and we hope that you're finding these updates valuable in how you can help to save the hunt.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Through the Gates. For more content like this, make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe on all of our channels.